Hi, welcome to our second episode of what we are now calling Andrew's Crop Circle Archives. We are really in these first few episodes setting the foundation of the original early research that was done into crop circles and paved the road for the worldwide phenomenon. And we're doing this to engage more conversation and deeper conversation and create an accurate record of what has been the history. And hoping as well through this process to let into the archive some things that maybe haven't been as public and tell some funny stories too. So we had a lovely morning collecting firewood, and now we're here to have a nice discussion. So just to refresh from last week a little bit. Last week we started by talking about the original team of researchers who were Terrence Meaden, the meteorologist, and the NASA engineer Pat Delgado, and pilot Busty Taylor, and yourself, electrical engineer, and the four of you traveling around the countryside in the 1980s collecting data. And then during that time, you attracted more people. You had Don Tearsley and George Wingfield and Richard Andrews and a whole second group of people who came in because of the publicity you were giving it and got involved and had quite a bit to offer the research. Then in 1989, you published the first book on the subject. You and Pat published Circular Evidence, and that book really changed everything because not only did it now become truly a worldwide phenomenon, in addition to that, you had so much data in that book that people who had never been into a crop circle could take that data and begin to analyze it and begin to utilize it to form theories and to do research. And that was an absolute game changer.
Oh yeah, it exploded, absolutely exploded. And of course that book not only was an international bestseller, it went into many countries. It was translated into many countries.
I think 18 languages, was it?
I'm not quite sure. It was a lot. And of course we have copies of them all here.
And of course the Queen's summer reading list didn't hurt.
No, it didn't. It didn't at all. It was the first time that Her Majesty the Queen had chosen a paranormal book for her summer reading list. So yeah, it really did something.
Yeah.
I think Pat and I there's no arrogance involved in this. It might sound that way, or maybe, but we were confident when we went to the publishers with the transcript that it was going to do something. Mm-hmm. We always felt that deeply inside. There seemed already to be something on our shoulder, pushing us along. And as soon as the chief executive, who wasn't planned, that he be at the meeting we were invited to take the transcript to in London. But he came in to the meeting. There were about four of them: the writing, the editors, and so on, the purchasing department, and they came in with the chief executive saying that these balloons that were in his office and others down the corridor, that had been as a result of a party and a launch of a book that they had published the night before, were going up and down. What was happening? And Pat and I looked at one another. It was hearing the inner voice. It's like something bizarre is happening. And within really a short time, they said, we'll take the book.
So really what you're saying is that even the launch of the book had this force behind it that was evident throughout.
Yeah, there was something else on our shoulder. It has always felt that way.
So in the beginning, and what was a lot into your first book, were physical features, were the sizes, the direction of the flow of the plants, the weaving of the plants together, the evolution of the designs, and the relationship of the plants to the topography. So why don't you say just a little bit, I know we talked about it last time, but a little bit about what was revealed in that.
What you mean in so much as the science that led from it?
Well, no, more in terms of one of the things that you noticed, like in the relationship to the topography, is that these circles or these formations were aligned with things in the topography that you couldn't see from ground level, and that had bigger meanings.
Yeah, yes, there were a number of things, as you indicate there, that were early signs that this was not anything that it was just thrown around randomly, that it occurred randomly. The plants coloration that you can see at ground level, you know, is one color. Usually you would look at a field and it's one color to you. But from the air, there's color variations depending upon the nutritional uptake of the plants, and that would depend upon the geology underneath the field. You know, whether it transfers from chalk to granite or limestone or whatever, there's a different nutritional uptake depending upon the geology, and also on the chemicals that are being applied to feed the plants. So from the air, it's a whole pictorial kaleidoscope of color, and that you don't see and appreciate at ground level. And what we saw in the early days, and that has continued on and off here and there throughout the years, is that the patterns, where they had evolved from circles, simple circles, to more complex on a major axis of designs and geological features, that they were aligning to the colors that we could see from the aircraft. So where a tractor turned round with the chemicals of, say, nitrogen, and then drove back across the field, there's a small increase in the application of nitrogen because the tractor's turning. It's going back over itself. It's part of that arc, and that's picked up from the aircraft. And these plants, these geometries, not the plants, would align themselves absolutely precisely to color variation that could not be seen from ground level.
So you mean like the circle, it went straight through the center of the circle or straight through the axis?
It's exactly
of the formation.
Right. Yeah, exactly right. And I mean, that to this day has been something that has really drawn my attention. I've not been able to explain, not in terms of if people have made every circle, every one of them in every country, not only in the database, but in those that we have not seen or have ever revealed to the public. If that is the case, how is it, or why is it that their constructions were aligned to a feature that they couldn't see?
So that is a future program, and hold that
future
thought.
Program, look forward to it.
The other thing you noticed that they were aligned to, in addition to water tables and the presence of water, you noticed that they were aligned with and in relationship to sacred sites.
Yes, that is right. That increased over the years.
And so let me interrupt and just say that when I say sacred sites, I mean megalithic sites like Stonehenge and Avebury, and the smaller, lesser known circles and iron forts.
That was a correlation in the data. There were two. Water was one. There were dew ponds, which is their natural depressions in the ground that form over many years, and they line themselves with materials that are not easily absorbable to for the water that collects there when it rains. And so those water collecting points are called dew ponds by the farming community, and these were often appearing not only close to them, but when we became interested for various reasons in dowsing, there were lines that were dowsable, very strongly dowsable, with the best dowsers that we knew, finding that there were lines that came from the center of the crop circle directly into the center of the nearby dew pond. And that was a consistency, or into lakes or into rivers. But water was a correlation with a large number of them, as was probably the most famous of them all, repeatedly coming because of the visual aspect, visual appreciation people got from seeing archaeological sites like Stonehenge, Avebury, Silbury Hill, West Kennet, Long Barrow, these very famous archaeological sites. And again, the crop circles were appearing close to them. I mean, that's a whole debate in of itself.
Yeah,
but,
and we will talk more about that too. And some of the research that came out of that, the sacred geometry research that came out of that who was the guy, George de Trafford?
George de Trafford of Malta. Yeah.
All right. So one of the first things that got analyzed outside of the things we've talked about were the mathematics. And there were really two people who came in and looked at the mathematics. One was the Professor Archie Roy from the University of Glasgow, and the other, of course, was astronomer Gerald Hawkins from Harvard, who was the author of Stonehenge Decoded. And so why don't you tell us first, I mean, I don't think too much came from Archie Roy, or maybe I'm wrong.
Well, it was different information. Archie Roy came in a little before Gerald Hawkins, and Archie Roy came to my home many times, and Pat's, and out in the fields as well. He became deeply involved in it all. But what he did, being a mathematician himself in his work in University Glasgow, Scotland, was to look at the patterns that we were at the time when he started his work with us. Were quintuplet sets. These are the 5 circles, again, a large one in the center, 4 satellites at the compass points, like the 5 dots on a dice.
Mm-hmm.
And what he did was to look at the possibilities by chance of those appearing as a pattern that had never appeared anywhere on the planet prior to 1983. And yes, 1983. And so he was looking at that and was working out the chances of that happening, and then the chances of them evolving in a particular form that they were taking. 5 in the, as a form of a cross, then with the single ring and the double ring, and then a multitude along major axes. So that was his work. He looked at the mathematics associated with that. He did also, through us, became friends, very close friends, actually, with Gerald Hawkins, Professor Gerald Hawkins, as you said. And Gerald was a mathematician and an astronomer, well-known one, as you say, more famously known for Stonehenge Decoded mm-hmm. and his work mm-hmm. there. So it was odd in so much as his work was, and is still revered. Mm-hmm. At Stonehenge, you can see it in the books there, and in the history they tell you about the site. That's his work. And around Stonehenge, odd it was that later in his life, midlife, that he would get involved in the crop circles that were forming around Stonehenge. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was 90% of the world's total at one point, around the 1991 period, were forming around Stonehenge. Mm-hmm. So his work was mathematical ratios. So he was looking at, I didn't know at the time that somebody had sent him or he purchased circular evidence. Mm-hmm. And he was going through the circles that we had written about, given enough data and the dimensions. Yeah, we gave the dimensions, we gave the magnetic bearings to near topographical features to be able to relocate the spot years later, and so on. And so what he found was that 11 of those, and I can't remember the total, I think it was 15, in circular evidence that we had written about, were diatonic ratios. These are the same ratios as the white keynotes on a piano, one tone to another, from 263 hertz, I believe, as the reference to C in the musical scale. And what we were looking at in physical dimension, and the ratios between, like, for example, a circle squared compared with the ring around that circle squared, the ratio between one and the other was the same ratio between one note and the adjacent note in the keyboard, the white keyboard in Western music. So that took on another direction, but that was Gerald's work from our data, first recorded in circular evidence, and then, of course, over the years, mm-hmm. by other means.
And so one of the things that came from that is Archie Roy was quite convinced that these circles could not have happened
haphazardly and randomly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's like anything else. There are many stories and laterals that come off of it. Mm-hmm. From that work, these two professors, with obviously myself and Pat, who were the source of the data, had shared it with the Queen's scientific advisor, and he visited.
And that was Stephen Fisk?
No, the chief scientific advisor for a period of time when my reports were going in, there were Dr. Fisk, yes. But then the Queen and the government's scientific advisor, whose name is escaping me, I can't quite get it. It'll come back to me. At a later point, at another period, a little bit after the Fisk's work, I wish I could remember it. He turned up at one of these surveillance operations too. But what he said to Gerald, as the advisor to the Queen, and he was there, I think, it was never said, but I think he was there at the direction of the Queen, because he turned up on this steep hillside in England near Alton Barnes, which took opening Farmer's Gate and going around barbed wire, this huge Rolls Royce with the professor who sat in the back had been clearly told to go there by somebody. And, there he was. But what he had to say was that at that point, with the mathematics, the data that we had secured globally in the database that we're talking about in these series of programs in the archive, was that the chances of that happening, this is again comes back to Archie Roy, was so big, so great, that if this were being conducted by a team of individuals, and there had to be a relationship, if these were the same ratios, there had to be some kind of plan, some kind of agenda discussion, and that would be a conspiracy of an international scale for that to have happened.
Right. So
his input.
So you're saying that these had to be, for these ratios to be consistent across all these crop circles worldwide, and at that point it was mostly England, there would have to be communication between those making them if they were made by people, a conspiracy. And so it was statistically significant that these ratios existed throughout the database.
Absolutely. That's well put. I do think that people should give us some slack for the direction that we took at that time, because we were becoming, well, I think a lot of people did admire it, but a lot of the scientific fraternity saw it as going too far to the extreme end of possibilities with regard to extraterrestrial possibilities, with UFO possibilities. Yes, indeed. And thank you for saying that, because that is where it led, and that is where it still is today, nearly 40 years later.
Well, and when I first met you, you had just made the video Undeniable Evidence, is that the title of it? And in that video, the whole thing was about consciousness, and that was in
1989.
No, Undeniable Evidence was
whatever.
89, 90, 91, around in there. Sorry.
Oh no, 89 was when it was first put out. But because it was transmitted in a number of countries, I think the period of time you're talking about is about right, 1991.
All right, so let's kind of move on a little bit. So there's a lot of research we want to go through. We're going to break this program in half, and the second half is all going to be on plant analysis, which I know is controversial and probably the most important part of it, but a lot of other research went on. And certainly one of the other things, talk about radiation. There's a theory in the beginning that radiation was involved in microwaves, and so talk about the radiation.
Can I just we'll pick back up on that, just to say this, because I need to kind of in a way get this off my chest a little bit as regards to some events that have occurred this week. Still, it goes on. I was watching as a result of the sad passing of the Larry King, famous for the Larry King Show, worldwide well-known program, well-known guy. And in that interview he did with my colleague at the time, George Wingfield, Larry was interviewing him with one of the skeptics from the United States. And of course, the skeptic put down the work that he was aware of us doing with dowsing as pseudoscience, laughed it off. And as you and I were saying, after watching that program, which is now on the internet, it for me that felt his was a slight. to put us down. For me, that term, is I'm honored to have it.
Well, it kind of means that you think outside of the box, that you're not constrained.
I mean, for me, that was an honor to be, whereas he thinks, of course, that he's putting you down for pseudoscience. We were prepared to accept anything that might give us some indication as to the energy fields involved, what they were, how all this was taking place. And dowsing was a reasonable thing to look at.
And we're going to be taking a big program just on dowsing. Right. So right now, how about Geiger counters?
Oh, yes. Yeah, well, okay, well, just to say that, one of the responsibilities in, local government I have back in central southern England was emergency planning, communications. So for major civil emergencies in that region that I have responsibilities for, which meant I was well equipped to do all kinds of things, one of which was radiation measurement. So I had the Geiger counter with me, and I tested for radiation in every circle we went to from the period of time that obviously I had the equipment. So many were tested, and I had nothing more than normal background radiation. Well, came along a project called Argos, which I was not directly involved in, but I was looking at the results, getting results, and knew most of the people involved. And what they did was that they were doing the same, but with different equipment, sending the results back to a government laboratory in the United States. And from that came one that there was a very rare isotope, extremely rare isotope, that had been discovered in their analysis of the plants that were taken back and the soil that was taken back from a number of crop circles during the period of the project. That was made public, and very soon after, the laboratory put out a statement backtracking. As I say, this is a government laboratory, backtracking to say that we should forget those results, get rid of them. It was a no-go because what they had discovered was that this isotope was being picked up from previous tests that had been run through the equipment. So that has always kind of held me a little bit of suspicion.
But your own equipment didn't show anything.
It showed nothing. Okay. I mean, ours never did show anything but normal.
But you did, so one of the things that happened frequently for people in the crop circles visiting them is that they would have interference with their equipment. There would be magnetic anomalies that would interfere with compasses, that would interfere with cameras.
Absolutely no getting away from it.
So you went back with magnetometers and spent one summer just doing magnetic readings. What did you find there?
Yeah, well, that was really fascinating. Magnetometer and electrostatic too, but we can maybe look at that separately, because that was primarily Dr. Simeon Hine and Ron Russell's work. That was. But the magnetometer survey was carried out, in probably 30 or 40 even patterns initially. And I think the easy way to say it was that there were interesting segments of a design that showed some form of an anomaly with regard to the Earth's magnetic field. It was 5 gauges, the normal magnetic field in the northern hemisphere in that region of the planet, and there were statistically a little on the high side in areas of the design, but not enough to shout about. I mean, we were new to measuring, for radiation in crop circles. I mean, who had ever done it before? Nobody. But one design was really quite extraordinary. And that again was a Celtic cross that was one of the late ones with a fascinating floor lay in Wiltshire. And the central circle of the Celtic cross, of the 4 other satellites around it, was an ancient tumuli. Well, no, tumuli in southern England in the Stonehenge, Hampshire, Wiltshire area are ancient burial grounds. And so that's what that was. And centered upon that precisely was a quintuplet set.
Could it be seen from the ground or only from the air, the tumuli?
The tumuli, it would be certainly visible from the air. And if you knew where to look, you would see it at ground level too, because it's a raised, it's a raised, hump of ground. But this result was significant. All of the data points, we gridded the entire area that encompassed the quintuplet 4 and the one in the middle, being the tumuli itself. Gridded it, took many equally spaced readings, and of course the readings we're looking at is one that from the probe, the Earth's magnetic field plus or minus whatever is happening. So outside of the actual quintuplet set was normal, and it was normal. There was nothing there. The only waving and formation was solar wind, and that's perfectly normal. But inside these designs, we were mimicking what effectively was happening. Was there an increase in the Earth's magnetic field, mimicking the actual pattern that we were measuring? Now that work, the analytical work on our measurements, was done by Professor Jean Aubrin, who was a former NASA scientist in California. And, but it had never been repeated. It was never repeated.
Just that one.
Just that one.
So I remember the pictures from that one, which hopefully we will be able to slice into this program for people to see. So although there was never a complete magnetic reproduction of the design in terms of variance in the field, you did find magnetic anomalies in other crop circles during that period.
Yes, we did. But some of them. Let me just go on to one other then, because this covers. A lot of people say you've done an awful lot of work on the ground and above ground in aircraft. Have you ever looked underneath? Well, yes, we have. Through the farmer at Alton Barnes, Eastfield is the famous one, Carson's farm. He authorized us to go into that field after the harvesting of a large circle, which again, I think we can probably pull up later to show people on at the end of this program, and gave us full access to carry a survey of what was underground. And so we pulled in a team of metal detectors from the Andover Society of Metal Detector people. And we had the team there, and we gridded it. We went across, and do you remember the artifacts we found? We found Roman coins, we found World War II, and the anomaly which we had picked up in our own survey, which was the one we've just been talking about. With the magnetometer, we picked up one hotspot, a real hotspot under that formation.
Which is why you chose that.
Yeah, that's exactly why. Exactly right. So we went back with the magnetometer, going in on that particular spot, and we found the reason, which was a large piece of cast iron that was part of a ploughing instrument, which it clearly had broken up many years before, and it got ploughed into the ground. But it affected the Earth's magnetic field in that very, very small specific place. So we did do the work.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that the circle formed itself around that magnetic anomaly without anyone possibly knowing that there was a share.
I can't imagine they would. I mean, I can't imagine they would. The farmer was quite amazed that something that large had not damaged his modern equipment.
Yeah. It was fun times we had.
Yeah, well, they were fun times. Yes, we were out there early that morning. I remember all of us to do that.
Okay, so another area of research was with Masahiro Kahata with brainwaves. And this was directly in relationship to how your train of thought had from the very beginning going along to consciousness.
Yeah, that's kind of, I'll try and keep it brief because there's a lot of interconnections there.
Before you start, let me just say that Masahiro was doing his own research in terms of just having people meditating crop circles and measuring your brain waves. And then we spent some time, my father and I actually, making a protocol. And the next summer we went out with Masahiro.
That's right.
And do a more scientifically controlled study.
Yeah, we engaged reputable dowsers and non-dowsers, people off the street. We've got, obviously a complete record of that. And Masahiro, who was a really phenomenal inventor, this was equipment that he had designed, was the inventor, is used in many hospitals, measuring brainwave activity. And it was fascinating work. I don't know that we got, I'm trying to think quickly, I don't think we were impressed with the equipment and what it did.
Well, I think what
states of meditation that were capable of being undertaken inside of them whilst they were wired up.
Yeah, I think what he was trying to show is that people meditating outside of a crop circle didn't have the same, depth of brainwave activity as people meditating inside a crop circle, which I think there are so many variables, you can't really make that a statement of fact.
Right.
But I think that, and I think this is all on his website, all of his data is on his website, so you can look at it and see what kind of correlations are there.
Yeah, I will just add something to that, Cynthia. I'm pleased you raised it. And I won't mention names. I don't think there's particularly any point with this. It was interesting to me, as dowsing is, talk about pseudoscience. If it's not the new science, is going to lead us into some phenomenal stuff in the future. But I remember that, look, as we were, if we weren't wired ourselves at that time, we were observing the computer as somebody else was being, wired, and signals coming back to this computer in the field live. I do remember when a certain individual that I think it's fair to say was psychic, he had a record of psychic experiences. I feel to say this because it might be part of the reason, not particularly liked as a person. So there's a personality energy situation there between individuals, including, I'll say, myself. I can't speak for you at the time, and it doesn't matter. But so that the scene that is set is that somebody from the United States at that time was being monitored on all the probes on Masahiro's equipment. We were watching things happening, and this individual turned up at the side of the field, looked across the field at the person being monitored and us in the field. We, in return, looked at him, and immediately the brainwave signaling changed.
Well, do you remember, did it go more up into beta, or did it go further down?
I'd have to look now.
Alpha, theta, beta.
I'd have to look. It broke. What basically it did was it broke the meditative state. The alpha, beta, delta signaling was interrupted. And there was possibly a rational explanation for it, but Masahiro himself said he had not seen that happen before. And it was at the absolute moment of his connection with us and with the design and with the topography that it was measured as such. There was a measurement.
Which would make
involved.
A great study in and of itself. I could design an experiment for that. That would be very fascinating. All right, well, so did Ron Russell and Simeon Hine find anything electrostatically?
Yeah, they did. They did. They found, I'll start when I've just mentioned myself, because then you'll have two scientific projects that confirm something. I'm going to say real in the sense they gave us results, scientifically measurable results. That quintuplet set that I was talking about around the tumuli, that gave a reflection, a mimicking of the actual design, but as a magnetic geometry and the magnetometer geometry. I've lost my way.
You're talking about the electrostatic results that Simeon and...
Oh, that's right. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So we had that result, and they, that is Dr. Simeon Hine and Ron Russell, with the electrostatic meter, not only did they have their equipment failing there, which we had also many times, and this is the point, they too had electrostatic readings that were not consistent with the surrounding topography. So they had a result that couldn't be explained. we had one that couldn't be explained. And here's the bottom line. Now, I can't prove this part of it. That the rest I can, but I cannot prove this particular statement. I was informed some years after that particular year, that particular project, that what we're referring to, this quintuplet set, was made by known individuals. So that in itself is important.
It is, because it means that it doesn't, that the source of the circles isn't as important as the impact of the circles.
Exactly. It's one of the indicators, and we're bringing it in early in this series, and it's something that we will hone right into, because one of the, I think, the important discoveries is that if you're looking to see how or who and who made, how and why did they make, if that's what we're looking at, and we answer that, is that, okay, well, let's say they're made by people. That's not the end of the work. By our results alone, it's the beginning of the work, because it indicates, what we've seen here indicates that the crop circles, these are markings in the field involving thousands, if not millions, of living plants, creates an attractor. The mystery that the native peoples talk about is important when you come to evolving consciousness. You know, this idea that we have to imagine before we manifest. You know, that here we have, however that design appeared, however any crop circle appears, if we carry on the work to include and not exclude the paranormal events that are occurring around them, we see that they're the same as what's occurring around the ancient sites that the crop circles are also appearing around. And so if we can't explain these events that are not made by people because they're not crop circles, these are events of lights in the sky, buzzing sounds, failure electronic equipment, manifestations, extraterrestrial beings, or some other entities that have been seen and discovered, and we'll talk about them in another program. But this is important. And so as far as that quintuplet set is concerned, it gave us 3 results. 1, electrostatic, magnetometer, made by people, let's just accept it, made by people, which is the attractor element that we have continued to look at now 40 years down the road, when so many people have packed their bags and gone back to their work and forgotten all about it. And here we are still doing the work, because that's the most important part of it all.
Yeah, and you just said something interesting when you used the word attractor. Okay, you said a lot of interesting things, but in that moment, you used the word attractor, and attractor is a concept that was used in the Institute for Resonance Therapy. You had a German institute that was looking at the resonance that these formations created with the surrounding environment and how it could be used in a healing capacity. So they were looking at the energy being produced, which they measured in terms of Beauvais, and then bringing the environment into that level of energy through resonance in order to do healing. And they had quite a lot of research on sites that did not produce good crops, that had been damaged in the war, and then they started applying crop circle energy in their system to these sites and essentially re-enlivening them. They had considerable research.
Oh, they did. I mean, one site I think we can speak to now, at the time it was confidential, if not secret, because of the well-known individuals involved. But they had contracted that it be kept secret. But we're looking at a site now north of Andover in Hampshire, very much a site that was utilized for its remoteness by members of the royal family, and hence why the secrecy, I think. But there was a site where there was a record of a very wealthy individual purchasing a large parcel of North Hampshire land, including this farm, including a manor, a mansion, including a church, including a pub,
field where crop circles were being made.
and a field, where crop circles were made, which were non-public. See, this is the business again, where people say, oh, they're all made by people. Well, I can tell you right now that I went with these individuals, the scientists in the institute you were talking to, by tractor with the farmer. I didn't even know it existed. And I lived in Andover, way into the countryside, way across the downs, where the land, the animals were kept. There were cereal crops there. There were all kinds of, it was a very big estate, is a big estate. But your point, things started to go awry. There was a sense that the people themselves were, their behavior was turning negative. Like I say, this included a pub and a church and the farm and a community. And their cereal yieldage dropped. Their plants were not healthy, and they were mystified. And I don't think the reason for it is known to this day. But IRT, Institute of Resonance Therapy in Germany, Kappenberg, Germany, came in.
So that was Hans.
Yes, Hans Muller, I believe. And Franz Lutz. And they came in, they applied their techniques, computer generated some of it with dowsing, and performed their particular magic, you might say. Pseudoscience. But the bottom line is that the results were phenomenal. They claim that there's a line through one of those forests where to the left it's measurable for leaf count on the branches of the leaves were XX, which was reduced to what they should be in a normal tree, and these were trees compared with the holon, as they called it, an area that was being monitored and being worked with via the computer transmissions in Germany. And the leaf count in that area was way up.
And it's interesting. So now we understand from biological research that forests arrange that there's a lot of communication between trees underground, that they share nutrients, that a tree that is struggling will have support from the trees around it in nutrient share.
Yeah, I mean, how fascinating is that?
They'll help the young trees that don't have sunlight get the nutrients from the sunlight in order to grow the forest, and that there will be one hub, one mother tree within the group that holds the whole group together, which I think if we were to look back on IRT research, which unfortunately they no longer exist as a institute, but that what they were calling a holon could be described as the area in which this mother tree held all of those individual components.
Yeah, I mean, just how fascinating is that?
And that's a TED Talk. Anyone can go look at on the TED Talks for the biology of trees. It's phenomenal.
It really is, yeah. And we did, and I'll put this picture up. We have one event, two, one in Russia and one in southern England, where in snow cover, in both the snow cover, they had melted rings around the trees that were there. I mean, very specifically, around each tree were melted rings that were radiating out from the center of the trees themselves. And again, that's melted snow. When you're looking at snow that settles at freezing, 32 degrees Fahrenheit, right on the freeze line, it takes very little temperature increase to melt that snow, because obviously it's solely very close to freezing that keeps the rest of it as snow. And so here you've got again an immeasurable effect. And in Russia, it was even more convincing. And again, I'll put theirs up. That was light snow on a pond, and you have this dartboard radiating concentric rings.
Right. So the way that nature organizes itself.
Yeah, an organized field.
So I think this is a really good place to break, because where we are right now is really getting into plants and the effect of the circles on plants, which gets us into the plant analysis, and that's going to take enough time that we'll break here and come back to that in a few minutes.
Okay.
Second half of our program too.
Okay.
All right. So to recap what we've been talking about, essentially a lot of research has been done looking at a number of different areas, and we can see a lot of effect. We can measure effects, but we can't ascribe a cause or a real significant impact on the plants themselves. But the circles themselves create an impact on the people investigating them, unquestionably, on the people making them, unquestionably, on the people visiting them. And that will be, maybe that should be our next program, and the one after that on people's involvement. Because putting a design in a field is taking a sacred geometry, interacting with earth energy, interacting with human energy, interacting with spirit energy, which the Skoll experiment described as the three components necessary. Those three components are what are necessary to make a connection between this dimension and other dimensions. And so we don't know what's happening in those fields, but something significant is going on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We don't have definitive answers, but we must go with the truth. With where we are to go is where we got to go.
Yeah. And that's why, although people were angry at you for tricking Levengood with your hoaxed circle, we have to go with the facts. We have to follow where the facts are taking us, no matter where they go. And it's not where we want to go. At that time, when in the 90s, you fully and completely believed it was incapable. Humans were incapable of making these circles, largely because of the effects that they were having on people. Not because of any of the science, but you totally believed it was not possible for humans to be making them.
Absolutely. There's so many things to say about all of this. I'm not going into detail, but it's just simply 10 seconds to support that. Is that sometimes they involve my own parents.
Yeah.
I'm there with their dog, my mother and my father, who I was with when things happened.
Mm-hmm.
They don't make things up.
Well, they had no
need to.
Horse in the race.
That's well put. No, I look forward to the discussion ahead, because there is so much to say.
Yeah. All right. Well, so thank you. We'll see you guys all next time.